Hey, Paul.
Hey, Fab. That intro still makes me smile.
Yes, it's so good.
Yeah.
After all these years.
After all these years. Yeah, so we both
Yeah.
come back, from summer and sort of relaxing with our families and not. We've had a few podcasts, and I thought, there's a few observations. I've listened to some good podcasts over the summer and a few things that I worked on that I kind of want to bring to your attention and see what you think live.
All right. Let's do it. It should be fun. Yeah, we'll call this one End of Summer Coffee Table Chat.
I like it. All right. So first thing I want to bring to your attention is something I've been working on with some clients, and I want your opinion on it. And it's kind of a simple concept from a simple mind.
Nice.
I've been trying to sort of work out, really define high level what's important in sales as an individual. And what I've noticed with a lot of companies, and I'm not sure if we may have touched on this in past podcasts, and if we have, well, too bad, is that a lot of, and well, I know we have talked about this, a lot of people focus on results. So say, I want you to attain this level, blah, blah, blah. And so sometimes you'll get a representative who's very lucky, maybe even lazy, but really smart. And they manage to get, some really good business, and they make a ton of commission. And, the ownership is sitting there like, chewing on their fingers going, damn, we have to pay so much commission. And they kind of know that it was a lucky straw or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But, their structure is, hey, you make so much commission on what you sell. And let's face it, a lot of things are somewhat luck related, and they're not necessarily activity related. So, we've talked about this before. So if you really want behavior to go in a direction that you're looking for, you've got to remunerate and encourage the activity that you are looking for, not just the results, right? Because there's three things in sales. There's three pillars, and I did a little quick thing on LinkedIn. If you listened to it, maybe you didn't. There's three things in sales. There's your activity, there's your methodology, and then there's the results or third-party influence. And the results are, a combination of those three things. Activity you do, the methodology you use, how the people you're talking to interact, and all that together gives you results.
Right.
So if you've got someone who's really shitty at doing activity, but they have a great methodology and they get lucky and they get awesome results, well, you might be disappointed because you're saying, well, geez, you should be doing so much better, but that's how you pay them. So why should they be doing so much better? They're doing what you asked of them.
Right.
And consequently, you might get someone who's a little bit more green, doing all the proper activities, but they have not the greatest methodology and they're not getting the best results. Well, are you going to fire them? Because maybe, in a couple of years or in a couple of months, they'll be a lot better as they increase their skills, which falls into methodology. So that's one thing that it's funny because I have so many clients and they're all like, yeah, I want them to have better activities, but I'm only going to pay them on commission depending on the results, right? So there's kind of like a bipolar approach there. Yeah, I want them to do the right activity, but I'm still going to only pay them on results, because ultimately, if they're not making money, it's hard for them. A company is judged according to the money you get is based on results. It's not based on it is based on the activity, but there's ultimately you look at the money that's in the bank at the end of the year when you're a business that's, selling nuts and bolts, right?
Right.
Any comments?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think it's hard to remunerate on activity, right? Because I think it's just, I don't know. I think at the end of the day, let's step away from that. At the end of the day, what I've seen a lot is that you're right. There's activity. Okay, so how people react, you can maybe there's less impact, right? If the person doesn't pick up the phone, the person doesn't pick up the phone. but or if they just sign a 10-year contract with your competitor, they just sign a 10-year contract with your competitor. But if you talk about your two other pillars, what I've seen before even talking about compensating on activity or methodology is like a lot of companies out there just don't understand if they even have a good methodology or what kind of activities matter, right? So it's because the thinking that I'm seeing is like, well, we're not going to compensate Paul on the number of emails and phone calls he does because he's just going to automate the whole thing and go on vacation with that. So the only thing we can really tangibly measure is the results at the end of the day. But they're forgetting that at the end, like the example you gave of that junior young person, like, well, do you let them go? Well, like a lot of people do, right? Because the results aren't there, and like he got trained on the product, so and John knows how to sell, so there's no reason why Bob can't sell. And then they let them go, but then what they don't often realize is that, well, there's a way of measuring the efficiency of your methodology. And so is it that is it that your new rep isn't following the methodology? Is it that they're not doing enough activities? But I think a lot of people just ultimately still struggle at that level, where they're like, they have one or two superstar reps and they compare everybody to them, and the only thing they can really compare to, because the rest they're not comfortable with, is results, right? Like,
Yeah,
Vanessa's driving sales,
yeah,
she's
and you're
crushing
totally
it.
right. I mean, you said a lot of really good things in there. So the first thing is, you said a lot of companies do product training, which is great. They do it really well. So they teach on how to do what it is that they sell really well, and the reps go out there and they know everything about the product. But really, when you're a good salesperson, what you really have to be good at is finding out the problem. Well, in a complex sell, finding out the problem or the solution that you're bringing forward. And let's call this whole thing a spaghetti sauce. The good salesperson, here's some tomatoes, here's some, whatever you need in the spaghetti sauce, and they all throw it at you. Say, okay, how come you're not making me a great spaghetti sauce? Well, you didn't tell me the recipe. You didn't tell me how to put it together. And you also said it before too. Often in a sales process, you'll see, oh, well, we got a great CRM. It's got, intro, discovery, close, proposal, whatever it is. And what happens in discovery? Well, they're discovering stuff, but you don't show them how to do that. And I saw a really good post recently. It says, well, here you go. We taught you everything about product. Now go out and sell it. Well, how do I do that? Oh, you'll figure it out. It's like, well, no. And that's where you need to have that process. And you're right, that's methodology, but you also have to have activity, right? So it's important, because if you could be really good at methodology, but if you're lazy and you're only making one call a week.
Right. And I'll argue, like, maybe activity is usually a little easier to track in this, because like everything these days is all digital anyway, right? Like your calls are through voice over IP, your emails, obviously, your meetings are through Google Calendar or Outlook or whatever. Like everything's, so those are what I find on an activity level is they have a hard time understanding the activities that matter, or everything just all bundled together. Well, okay, yeah, I made 17 calls yesterday, but which calls were with prospects and which calls were with existing customers that we're just checking in on, and which calls were with pipeline clients or pipeline prospects. So yeah, to me, like, that question is about, we compensate on results because that's what we can tangibly, that's the only thing we know at the end of the day, right? Your CRM could be like not updated. It could be, tumbleweeds going through there, or it could just be a complete mess. At the end of the day, we know when a contract was signed. And I think that's why, it's so hard for people to move backwards or upwards.
Yes and no, because in the last year, so many people have had great results with mediocre sales efforts that a lot of them are now saying, hold on a second, I'm paying a lot. During the pandemic, a lot of people did extraordinarily well, and no offense to salespeople, but in some cases, in spite of the sales, and there's a lot of really good, hardworking salespeople out there, but there's some that were just lucky during the pandemic. So the companies know that, and they're like, well, hell, I'm pissed off. I'm giving this guy the best commission of his life, and let's face it, he worked half as hard as he did the year before. So that's where some of these clients are starting to understand, well, okay, so if we want to drive that activity, the remuneration has to be based on that.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, I think we're saying the same thing,
Yeah.
basically don't just look at product, look at the other side, look at sales training, and look at rewarding the proper behavior to get you those results.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. So something else I want to bring up with you that we talked about just before, a little bit before the podcast, is I was listening to an interesting podcast, and they were talking to an ex-spy, and I thought it was really interesting because if you think about it, if you're a spy working for a secret, whether it's a CIA, the KGB, or whatever they're called today, or Mossad, and you're trying to gather information, well, what are you doing when you're gathering information? They're doing it for their country, and it's kind of criminal activity, right? Because if you're a spy operating in another country, you're a criminal. But essentially the basis, and it's going to sound really wacky to people out there, but the basis of developing a relationship, now I think in sales it has to be honest and you're presenting your true self. You're not a spy, but you are spying on your client in a way, right? But they know it. That's a difference. You're asking them questions, but you're trying to find out about their business. But the difference is everything's out in the open. They know you're trying to sell something and they know who you are, and you're trying to find out more about them. So forget the word spying for a second, but if you do this correctly, well, you're using human psychology to align with the person you're speaking to get them to open up to you. So one thing that's really interesting, and it's true, that everyone you speak to is a little bit different. Everyone has a different character. So if you just, a lot of people tell me, like, well, what are the questions I can ask? What's a magical sequence of questions? Well, you can't do that because every individual is different, and you might get some really bad results, and it's going to feel like an interrogation rather than an interview if you've got all your specific questions,
right?
But if you establish the basic psychology principle of empathy and perspective. So ask your questions based on what's important to the individual in front of you. So forget your product for a second. You're of course, you're talking about the general concept of what it is you're selling, but so if you're selling nuts and bolts, well, you're going to talk about the problem in manufacturing with nuts and bolts. But really what you're trying to do is discover what's important to your prospect. Well, the way you do that is through questioning. Your questions have to be open, but you also have to adjust to what the person's saying to you. And you have to take control of that interview, right? It's not an interrogation, it's an interview. And one other thing that I heard that's really interesting, and I think we know this, you and I know this, but some people think, well, in an interview, who's in control? Some people say, well, I'm in control because I'm answering what I want. Right? But you're not. The person in control is the person asking the questions, because they're the ones deciding what question comes next.
Yeah.
And they're basing them, if they're intelligent and they have your best interest at heart, they're going to ask you good questions to find out what's important to you, to see how they can help you. So the difference between a spy and a good salesperson is a spy is doing it for his own interest, without being honest, without you even being aware of why they're doing it. The difference with a salesperson is they're open and they're telling you that they're doing this to try to help you achieve something. So the whole concept of the psychology and getting someone to open up, however, are the same. For me to understand your character, for me to understand how to adjust, for me to make you feel good about the things you've done well, right? So if you're a business owner who's done really well, hey, it's impressive, you've done this, this, and that. If it's honest and sincere, you are opening them up, and you are making them feel that they can be comfortable in your presence. So that part's the same. That's the developing the relationship, right? The how to win friends and influence people. So you make sure that the person's comfortable in speaking to you, but ultimately you're still in control because you're driving the questions.
Yeah.
So what do you think of that? So spy and salespeople are in the same boat.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. It's clear that the person who asks and you could tell, right? Like, because obviously as a salesperson, you can get all the training in the world and you can have all the experience in the world. You're going to bomb some calls and you're going to do super well on other calls. Um, and just anecdotally, like the sales that I make are the ones where I'm able to ask more questions. I'm more prepared. I'm more ready for the call. And the calls where I don't ask enough questions are the ones that go nowhere, right? And those are the calls that like got sandwiched between two other meetings. I didn't have time to prepare, and blah, 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 or
But
whatnot.
wait a
And
second.
so,
What do you mean by prepare? Just so I understand, because that's important. Because someone listening to us might think prepare. He wrote down all his questions.
no, I do have like areas of interest that I want to approach, like what's happening on the sales side of thing. I mean, this is just for my stuff. Sales side of thing, on the marketing side of thing. I want to make sure I'm covering everything. I want to make sure that I'm reminding myself that I want to. What's their end goal at the end of the day? What are their in my case, revenue targets, stuff like that. So when I say prepare myself, it's more reminding myself of some of the key elements that I need to get answers on, right?
Address. Okay. So
Yeah,
the things you want to address.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's interesting. That's interesting. And Fab. So we've been working together now. We've been doing these podcasts for 2 years, and what the thing that pops out, and I've said this to you before, and it's right there in our title. I ask the right questions, but why is it so hard for human beings to ask the right questions and stay in the moment and be empathetic and really try to understand the perspective of their client? Like, why is that so difficult?
I think there are a lot of different reasons, but it could stem one from at the end of the day, you don't care, right? You're selling the wrong product. You're in the wrong job. You don't care, or sales are just easy, right? Like it's just you're in a booming company, and it's just like you're basically just taking in orders and stuff like that.
Yeah, good answer.
So that's why maybe a couple extreme cases. I think at the end of the day, we're not taught to ask questions, right? Like you don't, as a kid, you're always like, stay, be polite and like don't, like, and although I'm not saying stay quiet, like we're not that old, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's where it stems from. Like there's a certain brimming of curiosity, and at the end of the day,
Hold
I don't
on,
know. I could just,
pause that. That's so true, and I want to pause there because think of your kids. I think of my kids when they're little. They're so good at asking questions, right?
yeah,
So, Daddy, why did you go fishing? Oh, because I like fishing. Why?
yeah.
And they're really good at and we almost, I don't want
Like
to say,
forget the 5 whys. They're at the 37 whys.
yeah, and I don't want to, we don't beat it out of them. It's not the right expression, but you know
Yeah,
what I mean. We sort of squeeze it out of them. Oh, stop asking
yeah.
questions, or that's
Yeah,
irrelevant.
in school, right? Like the
Yeah,
teacher's not going to accept that every kid asks like why to everything in the
yeah.
world, right? Even though,
It's almost like,
yeah,
listen, just shut up and listen. Do what I'm
yeah,
telling you.
yeah. This is how you write. This is how you do math. Like stop trying to figure it out. This is how you do it. So I think this is a big part of it. Um, and
So should we
so
go back to? Should we tell people think how you were? Well, most people don't remember. Remember how you were when you're 5 years old and you used to ask too many questions. Go back to that.
yeah, I think also there's a certain component of I don't know, maybe that's just for me. Obviously everybody's different. I tend to be very analytical. And so when you read about, or like, oh, there's a sales process and the methodology, and these are the things, right? Like, I feel like there's something about selling where I mean, like consultants and whatever, try to like try to make it hyper concrete, and it just feels weird as a salesperson. Like, I'm just going to go on a call and talk to Paul and see what he wants. And I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, I'm having a hard time explaining it, but there's a certain
Well,
disconnect.
I think I know what you're saying, and tell me if I'm right because I just had a brain fart. I don't know. Brain farts are a good thing. I still don't like that expression, but so you're saying that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's two types of salespeople, right? Well, let's say bipolar. So here, I'm going to do it in Tampa. So you've got the sales evangelist on this side, the person that talks, and hopes to sort of convince. They're an evangelist. They're trying to convince you of a point of view that they think is going to help you, right? Let's assume these people are good on both sides. And then the side, you've got the psychologist who's going to ask you questions to find out what it is you're trying to do continuously. So you've got the evangelist that talks, doesn't ask a lot of questions, and you've got the psychologist that asks a lot of questions. And is it possible that, you know, most people are somewhere in the range in between those two, but maybe some people are too much the evangelist and they believe so much in their product, so they're pushing. And some people are maybe too much on the questioning side and they fear that, oh my God, the guy's going to get annoyed by all my questions and wonder, well, what the fuck's your solution? Right? I don't know. Is that sort of, that's from what you were saying, that's the way I saw it, you know?
Yeah. And I think at the end, it stems down into like maybe a third reason, which we kind of alluded to earlier on, right? Where we talked about product training. I think, especially in SaaS and tech, you know, you have a lot of very young salespeople talking to very, very senior, like, you know, chief marketing officers, CEOs, chief financial officers, like whatever industry you're in, right? And they have no idea what the reality is, right? Like when you're like a 18-year-old salesperson selling a piece of software, talking to CEOs of, let's say, a Fortune 1000 company, you have no idea what the reality is like. And all you've been trained on is the product. So you don't have a choice really but to go into evangelist mode, right?
Yeah.
Like you've been told, like,
but you do, but
you don't have a choice in terms of like, you don't have the training to do it, right? Like you're just being sent there where, so when I say you don't have a choice is because you just don't have the tools to do it at the end of the day. And so what happens is that you have a certain 1% of salespeople that just kind of maybe intuitively get it for whatever reason, and they crush it because they realize that their software is not just selling A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It's selling, lower, fee structures. It's selling, peace of mind. It's selling IT redundant. It's, what I mean? Like, and so they're able to go there. But I think far and few, most of those just understand it. I don't know if they're more curious. I don't know if they're more perceptive. I don't know or they were maybe paying more attention to that one consultant that came in that one time. You know what I mean? I don't know what it is, but I think a lot of the salespeople are just not trained on what is a CEO concerned about, and why do they need to worry about our CRM or our accounting software or whatever.
No, and I think you're right. I mean, if and that's sales training, right? So what are the problems we solve? And what does that mean to our clients? So that's what you're saying. So what's going to be important to that CEO? What's going to be important to that COO? What's going to be important to that CMO? What is it that they're trying to fix, and how have we fixed it in the past, right? So that's where the psychologist comes into play, right? Because they're finding out what those problems are. And I'm going to say something, really, really controversial here, but I think some of the best, and I'm going to give some examples, some of the best salespeople in the world are hardcore evangelists who don't give a crap about their clients. Specific needs. And I'm going to give you an example. He's dead now, but Steve Jobs was one of those. When he'd get up on stage, he was like a snake oil salesman, except he had real good snake oil. He would get up on stage and he would talk about his product. And you're like, I want this iPhone. I want this iPod, and I want this whatever Mac, because he was a great evangelist. He didn't really know your specific needs, but he would talk in a way that he was a great evangelist. He was like, what's that guy's name? Billy Graham. I'm not religious, but religious people follow him. Whereas there's very few of those. And a lot of people try to be like that. And that new salesperson that you're talking about that is told all the great things about their product is trying to go out there and just, be a good evangelist. And some of them will be good and they'll get some sales. But chances are it's a lot harder being a great evangelist than it is at being a good psychologist. No offense to psychologists, because a psychologist is asking questions and is being very specific in their needs. So, Fab, what is it that, what are the problems that you're trying to fix? And then I can be an evangelist to those specific points. That's a lot easier, right? Because now I know what it is that you're trying to fix. And you're totally right. In a lot of big sales organizations, here's a product, it's great, it's wonderful, go out and sell it. And they don't teach you anything on the problems that you'll be solving. They don't teach you how to ask.
Well, they'll teach you the problems, but they won't. You don't when you're an 18-year-old salesperson and you're talking to like a 63-year-old CEO who's had, they've had most of their career already. They've lived stuff. They have real stress. They have real pressure. I mean, not that you don't have one as an 18-year-old salesperson. It's like, oh, like, are you concerned that, you're not getting paid fast enough by your clients? Well, yeah. But so what, right? Like, there's no digging. Oh yeah, well, you know what? Our software does that. But there's no indication. Okay, but like as a
But that would be like the
CEO,
psychologist saying, okay, so are you depressed sometimes? Yeah, I'm depressed sometimes. So here's some pills, let's call it a psychiatrist. So here's some happy pills, they'll make you happy.
Right. But that's what I'm saying is that most, and that's where the sales training often lags, and where the support. And I think, and then there's a whole like sales culture that goes with that, because there's also that ability that you've talked about all the time, which is sales is often also about disqualifying, right? Is like, by asking questions, you're realizing who's not a right fit, but then there's this need to have like a full pipeline, and there's this need. And so, we train people into like saying surface, really, when you're talking about at the beginning of the show, like remunerating on activity is like, we're not doing that, because we'd rather have Paul have a full pipeline of mediocre opportunities than a slimmer pipeline with really great opportunities. We'd rather have Paul close at 22% than have him close at 67. But it looks better to have like this massive pipeline that closes at 22% than to have a smaller pipeline that's closing at 62. Because if you are 67, because if you're looking at 67, you're like, but can we do more? And I'm like, well, the challenge is like, maybe, but I have to be able to disqualify. I have to be able to walk away from opportunity. I'm talking to somebody and I'm like, I spoke to somebody recently and they're like, they want to do like this massive web project on HubSpot. I'm like, I'm just not a developer. Like, it's not what I do. Like, I know I'm stepping away from HubSpot commission. I'm stepping away from fees and all that stuff, but it's just, it's not what I do. And so many salespeople would be like, but I'd rather have that person in the pipeline
so
than
really,
to just lose
what
the
you're
deal.
really talking about there, Fab, and I think we've talked about this in the past, or we've talked about everything in the past, is qualifying, right? So you're teaching a salesperson on how to properly qualify, right? So, and that's what you did when you were talking to that person a few weeks ago. You said, well, it's not what I do. I'm not a developer. It's not my expertise. I'm not going to do that. You've qualified them, and you're right. But I've said this before, and I sound like I'm evangelizing here. But if you do the activities properly and you've got the right methodology and you ask the right questions, you'll find out and you'll be able to qualify better. But if you don't have enough in your pipeline and you're scared to death, you're gonna qualify to include stuff that's shit, because you want to make sure you've got 100 opportunities in your pipe, no matter what. But really, if you do the proper activities and you ask the right questions, you'll have 100 good You'll have 100 good opportunities, because you'll have disqualified 900 of them.
Yeah.
Out of 1,000. So
and that's where we're not. I feel that's when we ask at the beginning, like, why aren't people asking questions? I think that's, at the end of the day, yes, we're not trained. It's banged out of us as kids and stuff like that. But I feel like one of the biggest reasons is like we're afraid to get the answer. At the end of the day, we don't know it. We don't know what questions to ask, because we don't understand the client's reality. But at the same time, we're afraid. We're afraid that they're going to tell us, you know what? No, like, actually, our accounts receivable are on point. Like, I don't have an issue. Like, we're afraid to hear that, because that means I'm going to have to lose the deal.
It's
move on to the next one.
And that's sort of again, if we go back to the kindergarten kid, who has a crush on the other person, they'll just walk up to them and say, "Hey, can I hold your hand? I really like you." The kindergarten kid's just going to do it. And if the person says no, they're like, okay, they're going to walk over and ask someone else. Whereas by the time you're in high school, I mean, in my case, if I had a crush on a girl, my God, I never asked her if she liked me back because she could have told me no. So for a year and a half, I lived in this void of unknowingness to find out later, well, she didn't like me. Well, you know what? If I asked, I wouldn't have wasted. It's stupid, but you're right. And you get attached to these ideas, and you're right. You don't want to find out, and it's stupid because it just holds you back.
And it goes to other things. Is like then we don't know how to prospect. Prospecting is hard. So if I lose this opportunity, I'm gonna have to go find another one. Like, oh my gosh, if I lose, I have 3 now that are bad fit.
I want to talk about that. What's this? What is this? How is prospecting? Which part of prospecting is hard? Actually doing it or convincing yourself to do it? Like, let's talk about that for real for a second. Let's give ourselves 3-4 minutes.
Let's do 3-4 minutes and then call it a day.
Am I boring you, Fab?
No. I think it's a big topic, and we can go on for a long time.
Okay, so let's do 3-4 minutes, and we can talk about it. But I want to ask you, what's hard about prospecting?
What's hard about it? It's finding who to talk to. Everybody knows picking up the phone is difficult. Everybody wants to send like the perfect drafted email, so they don't have time to pick up the phone. I know there's a lot of play. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why prospecting is not a pleasant activity.
I'll tell you.
I think, what I see, what people stumble on the most is how do I find the right people? Like, where do I go to find them? Because I'm afraid to disqualify.
The point of prospecting is you don't know if they're the right people. You're finding out. I think the real thing is rejection. People are afraid to be rejected.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it boils down to that. They're afraid to be rejected, and that's why they spend like hours crafting a perfect email. When in reality, you're going to need 12 of those emails and 13 calls just to see if that person is qualified or not. You know what I mean?
And the last thing I just want to fit. So let's make this our next podcast subject. Like why is rejection? But it's funny because I was just talking to someone recently who said exactly that. I want to find the perfect email, and I said there's no perfect email. And the other thing that people think is they think they're being rejected or being annoying. They're not. Just think of it when someone's trying to reach out to you. I mean, you're your own business owner, so am I. Some people reach out to me 2-3 times. They don't get through to me. I can just imagine them at the other end thinking, oh, I'm being annoying. They're not being annoying. I just don't have time. And that one time, if they call me and if they answer, if anything, if I answer, I'm not annoyed. I'm happy they called back because I might feel a little bit bad that I didn't pick up the phone the few times before. So let's treat that in another podcast. But I think to wrap this up, it was fun. Good end of summer coffee table chat, and maybe maybe we'll get some comments on this. But thanks for indulging my not silly, but my sort of cloudy subject matter. You did. I think you jumped in really well. I appreciate it.
All right, Paul. Take care, everybody. Talk to you next week.
Salut.